One of these. But if that's hard to comprehend, there's something else. In 2010, scientists found something extraordinary. Evidence that our bubble, our universe, has been bruised not once but 4 times. Why? Because it's smashed into other bubbles. And do you know what those other bubbles are? Other universes. There could be millions of them. Parallel worlds. Other dimensions that exist alongside ours. Amazing, isn't it? Let's think about this. If it's true, that means there could be people or something like us floating around inside them. Isn't that a little scary? Could we, in the distant future, bump into something or someone from a neighboring dimension? Well, I've got news for you. It's happening right now. Yep. It's a weird world.
What the fuck?
And I love it. Hundreds have reported encounters with dark, humanoid, transparent creatures. They call them shadow people.
You have a feeling that there may be something unseen watching you. There's no facial features, no eyes, but yet you know it's looking at you. You simply know when you are encountering something that's not quite of this world.
It felt as if there was a male presence there who was evil.
I can remember seeing this figure in the doorway.
It hits me so hard at times where it just knocks me off my mattress.
She's choking me so hard that I think that my voice box is going to collapse. The fear is extremely real. You look around the room, you're looking for any way out. I can see my clock, I can see the curtains, I see everything in the room that tells me that this is real, this is happening to me, this is really happening. And I'm wondering why my husband can't hear them, why he can't hear the struggle, why he can't hear the fight. And beyond that, I'm wondering what's going to happen to me after they kill me, who's next? Your mind and your body thinks you've been through it. But to everyone around you that you associate with, that you work with, your friends, your family, your doctors, they say it was just a dream, just get over it.
Chris French is a psychologist. He believes there is a simple explanation.
These shadow people are just shadows. The way that these shadow people are said to move is kind of a very fleeting motion. One moment they're there, next moment they're somewhere else. I mean, to me, it sounds very much like the way that shadows move.
Are shadow people simply random shadows? If so, what gives them such distinct human shapes? French believes the answer lies in a phenomenon called pareidolia.
Pareidolia refers specifically to this idea that we can sometimes think we see clear and distinct human forms in what is essentially just random background noise. So I think everybody's probably had the experience of looking at patterns on wallpaper and making out faces in those patterns. Or we look up in the clouds and we see animal shapes. People have found images of Christ in plates of spaghetti, in cinnamon buns, in the burn marks on tortillas. What you've got are really kind of more or less random patterns, but we will impose some kind of meaning on them. People tend to experience shadow people in certain kinds of locations. If you're in a forest, if you're in a cave, if you're in somewhere where there's lots of shadows, then those are precisely the kind of random background visual noise situations where you might actually think you can see things that aren't there. And there's probably also the fact that in certain kinds of environments, there are reasons why we might actually feel on edge. So, for example, if you went into a cave and there's a very, very high ceiling in the cave, then again, that will tend to make us feel slightly on edge because we don't know what's up there, what might be about to jump on us. And if you think of this from the evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that in certain locations we are more kind of alert, more on guard, more aware of possible threats in the environment than in other places.
But many who have encountered shadow people feel physically threatened.
It's putting so much fear within me that I'm unable to sleep, that I feel that I have to keep opening my eyes to see if there's something in the room. And it's affected my mood, it's affected my depression, it's totally rendered me literally useless to society, useless to everybody.
There's one particular time he seemed to be very upset, not so much agitated, but almost fearful. And he said, look, it's at me again, it's bothering me. I said, what is bothering you? He said, you don't believe me. I said, of course I believe you, son. But so I laid in the corner about a foot away from him, got just that little bit closer, and I felt an immediate type of a vibration, a physical presence of some kind. And yet I did not feel that whatever was bothering or obsessing Ted was malevolent. It was as if he were attracting some force, something outside of our dimension.
I think he's possessed because when he's awake, he's not violent. And he just don't look like himself when he's having a night terror. He don't sound like himself.
I think one of the reasons that people often perceive these things as being something potentially threatening is because that's the way we've evolved. In terms of our evolutionary history, then it makes sense that we have cognitive systems that are very much tuned to picking up on possible threats in the environment.
I can't recall none of it. It's like I go to sleep, I wake up, and I don't know what I did, what made me do what I was doing. It's just, I feel like she said, possessed. I feel like something jumped in my body and made me just go crazy.
Are our survival instincts tricking us into believing a shadow is a terrifying and real creature?
It's an extremely common phenomenon for perfectly sane people to sometimes see things that aren't actually there. There are parts of the brain that are hardwired to recognize faces and human forms. And so sometimes those parts of the brain will actually fire when what we're looking at are really just shadows.
Philip Imbrogno is a paranormal researcher. He thinks the answer is clear.
From the cases that I've studied about shadow people, I believe they are interdimensional in nature. They're intelligent. They belong to a race of beings that predates human beings. They exist in a dimension very close to ours.
It's an incredible theory, but it begs one big question. How can we know these other dimensions exist? Imbrogno believes the answer lies with the force of gravity and its component part, the graviton.
The particle that is responsible for gravity has been labeled the graviton.
According to Imbrogno, he will soon have hard scientific evidence to support his theory.
When these dimensions are opened up, we should see an influx of gravitons.
Are shadow people using gravity to open portals to our dimension? And if so, what do they want?
It's right here where we are. It's a different frequency in the same place we are. When they're in that fourth dimension, they're almost at our frequency. That's why they can see us. We can't see them, but they can see us.
Yes, they can see us. And some of us can see them. I believe all of us have the ability to see them.
So up until perhaps 100 years ago, with classical physics as the best description, there wasn't any way that physics would even allow for these kinds of phenomena. So Somewhere about 100 years ago, a little bit more now, the idea of multiple dimensions came along. And so people doing my kind of work suddenly became very interested in the possibility that there are other dimensions here. Like you go to CERN, for example, and talk to the particle physicists who are beginning to figure out, based on things like the standard model in physics, how do we explain why when you mash together a bunch of protons or neutrons, why do you get the result that you get? Well, there's a bunch of particles. Well, some of those theories require that you need more than 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time in order to describe it. So that's how you begin to find that these other dimensions. The mathematics are much simpler when you deal with higher order dimensions than if you imagine that all there actually was 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. So that's where the comfort comes from in physics, that the mathematics say, well, there ought to be 11 dimensions, because then everything kind of works really nice, and that allows you to predict that if you take certain hunks of matter and you mash them together, that the behavior of that should look a certain way with 11 dimensions, but it would look very different with 3.
And physics says we have 7 levels in string theory and 1 more level in M theory for a total of 11 dimensions. Those 8 extra dimensions which we have not discerned are the dark energy, the 96% of the universe that we cannot yet even detect. But we know mathematically that it's there from our astronomy. We know that the dark energy and the dark matter exist and make up 96% of the universe, which we don't yet see. There's a lot of room for a lot of afterlife and a lot of different levels out there. But the materialist scientists who only want 3D, they won't look at it. They won't even, they say, no, it's a bunch of baloney. They don't even look. They just say, no good, impossible, I'm not even going to look at it. Well, how do they know it's impossible? They see 4% of the universe and the rest of it's impossible. But that's ridiculous. We have to remember that it's not in our 4%. We can't know it all yet. But we're now at a point where we are making beachheads on a new territory, those other dimensions.
I think when you're a scientist working on the edge of the known, if you really require certainty to feel comfortable, you're in the wrong business. Because most of the time you begin to recognize when you're studying over the edge of what is known, nobody knows what's going on. For me, that's exciting. And so I don't mind that we don't understand it. The challenge is, how do we become clever enough to be able to study that unknown space and begin to understand it?
The quarks and the gluons, which make up our atoms. String theory is that they're made up of a vibration, and you think about a vibration without a string vibrating. Now you have what quarks and gluons are made out of, a thought, a vibratory thought. And that's consciousness. And that's what makes the whole universe. Well, if consciousness comes first, then this whole idea that the neurosurgeons are using, that the brain, the wet brain creates the thought, is bullshit.
Science does not have an explanation yet. I mean, when we think about what does it mean to have an explanation, in science what that typically means is we want a causal explanation. We want to know that this interacts with that and that interacts with this, and we have a causal sequence that explains how things work. So from that perspective, we have no idea. We don't know how psychic abilities work. But we also don't know how consciousness works. We don't have any explanations for that either. We're still very young creatures, and science is too new. So I think about other planets out there that may be 1 billion years ahead of us. They probably know a little bit more than we do, if there are people who are scientists there. And they would look back at us, what we're trying to do now, and saying, these creatures don't have any idea what's going on. I mean, most of the really fundamental questions that we would have about life and us and the planet and the universe and all that stuff, which are all very interesting questions, we have some answers, but it's just barely begun. And all scientists learn very quickly that there are certain things you don't talk about. You don't push against the social environment in science, because if you do, you won't have a job. You won't be able to do what you want to do. So this is no different than in politics or in any other domain of human affairs. So we learn that there are certain things you talk about and certain things you don't.
I know when I say I'm a medium that all the other scientists look at me like, he's not a scientist, he's a nut. But it's okay, I'm retired, who cares? I don't care anymore. Okay? they still have their career. They're still worried about everyone else thinking they're crazy, you know. So they are careful about saying things, and I understand that. But more of them should have a little more courage and say, I don't know everything. I'm going to look. Instead of saying it's impossible, they should look. And I believe in physics, and I'm a naval architect. I've designed many ships, and I know all about how to use physics in our 3D to make things work. But I also know that that's just a limited little corner of the world, and that the huge universe out here besides that, and this huge universe we don't know anything about. And I can stand up there, even if the guys who want to hide in the 4% little corner want to laugh at me, let them. They're the fools. I'm not the fool. I realize we don't know.
Most scientists tend to be pretty smart, and the smarter you are, the easier it is to fall in love with a theory. And the theories are explanations. They make us feel comfortable in the world. So if you spend your entire adult life learning about a certain description of the way that the world works, you become comfortable with that. And after a while, you begin to see the world in those terms. I happen to have a lot of friends who are theorists who can only see the world through their theory.
We use it false evidence appearing real, F-E-A-R. False evidence appearing to be real. That's what fear is. It's not real. It's not real at all. Fears are based on nothing.
Are we facing an invasion of beings from a neighboring dimension? Should we be afraid? Very afraid? Or are they nothing but a trick of light? Are shadow people from other dimensions already amongst us?
It seems to me that the main objective of the shadow person visit is to learn about us as much as they can. Usually, the prelude to an invasion is going and getting intelligence before you make your move. Some people believe this is what's being done.
For many years, the Vatican has been looking at the same invisible terrestrial entities and also at things like Planet X and other incoming objects. And they well know that our planet will be struck. They know that we're being visited, that we're being monitored, and that they are covering all of this up. Part of it is to, keep us in the dark so that we don't panic, sort of a thing. But the other is to maintain control over us. To maintain power and control over the masses, you deny them the information, you deny them the education, you deny them the truth. They are going, and I'll cut to the chase here, as I like to do, they will, in disclosure, say that we are being visited and have been visited by intelligent entities who in fact are the benevolent ancestors from the stars. I think that the disclosure will be that they are saying our ancestors have come here to rescue us from ourselves, to solve all of the world's problems, and we need to turn ourselves over to these ancestors, follow their lead, follow their technology, do whatever we're told, because they are benevolent. And it is quite the opposite. There is nothing benevolent about what is about to come upon this earth. A lot of new topics have popped up, not just CERN, but antimatter and all kinds of occult, nefarious things happening with the Super Bowl. And there's just a lot that's coming together, what I like to call the coalescence of falling under the large umbrella of disclosure.
You have uncovered and provided and identified a lot of information about CERN, about the telescope. Maybe we could begin here, if you don't mind.
This is a binocular or a dual telescope that has been set up, and they're fairly small. I mean, they're just, things that you can carry around yourself. We're not talking about an observatory like Mount Graham in Arizona, but we'll get to that in a moment. But this is a project, and, in the past you've heard me talk about the Thunderbolts project in terms of the electric universe. Well, this is a similar name in the sense it's called Thunder Energies Corporation. So, a little synchronicity going on with the names there. But Thunder Energies is out of Florida, and Dr. Centilli is the chief scientist at Thunder Energies Corporation, and he's the one who has been doing, I would say, about 50 years of research into antimatter itself, and has developed his own mathematical language, which is a complete departure from the standard model of mathematical language of trigonometry and that sort of thing that is used in standard physics, standard science today to write out the theorems and the formula that we typically see in science. But I really dug into his curriculum vitae, and this gentleman is a upstanding scientist.
Since the dawn of our civilization, all the way to the time of this breaking news, we humans believed that everything that exists up there is only what we can see with our eyes and with our optical instruments. Well, things have changed now, because we have established the existence of entities existing in our terrestrial environment. And these entities are completely invisible to our eyes as well as to our optical instruments, but are fully visible with new instruments, therefore dramatically enlarging our conception of the perceivable universe, with far-reaching possibility of future development and discoveries that perhaps are beyond our imagination at this time.
He is counter. He is going against the mainstream science world.